and if necessary, destroy media narratives on George Samueli. It is now 9:10 p.m. in the Central European city of Budapest. And I need hardly remind you, today is June the 19th, which means that there are 2 days left before we reach June the 21st, the longest day of the year. And then from then on, as I've always said, it's all grim, gloomy, downhill all the way, as we note each day just how much shorter today was than yesterday and how much shorter tomorrow will be than today. So that, and then all the way to that terrible, horrible time of the interminable months, November, December, January, February. No, actually, we should count October in there as well. These are the last few days to be enjoyed. Now, thank you everybody who has joined me, on a more cheerful note. It's been quite an eventful day. Even if there haven't been too many events, but it has been an eventful day in the United States. And on Tuesday, we were sort of leaning towards Trump deciding sometime really within the next 24, 36, 48 hours to move against Iran, to strike Iran. That's how it seemed on Tuesday. But today there's been a bit of a shift. And really within the last hour, Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, came out and delivered this brief statement. So let's take a look. What it's very brief. So let's just see what she actually said. So here she is, and let's hear it.
Now, regarding the ongoing situation in Iran, I know there has been a lot of speculation amongst all of you in the media regarding the president's decision-making and whether or not the United States will be directly involved. In light of that news, I have a message directly from the president, and I quote, "Based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks." That's a quote.
All right, let's listen to that again. It's very short. Let's listen to it again.
Now, regarding the ongoing situation in Iran, I know there has been a lot of speculation amongst all of you in the media regarding the president's decision-making and whether or not the United States will be directly involved. In light of that news, I have a message directly from the president, and I quote, "Based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks."
Okay. So there'll be negotiations that may or may not take place, and then he may or may not make a decision within the next 2 weeks. Well, you'd have to say that that's definitely a slowdown in the decision-making process, and so it would suggest that Trump really doesn't want to go, and this has been really obvious for the past few days. I mean, really, after all the excited bluster of in the immediate aftermath, which is now a week ago today. It was a week ago today that Israel launched these attacks, and Trump, after the initial statement by Marco Rubio saying, "Oh, this was a unilateral act by Israel. The United States had nothing to do with it," Trump endorsed this. He seemed to endorse it, and very soon was talking about we with involving both the United States and Israel. And so that was the talk. And then, of course, we covered the other day his fiery truth storm, in which he issued all manner of dire threats against Iran, and so that's why it seemed like, well, he's ready to go. Um, it seems now that he's walking it back and saying he's going to make he's going to make a decision within 2 weeks. So the question then is, well, what is this? What diplomacy is he talking about? So if we look at sort of the latest media reporting, here was the right. So here we have the story in the Washington Post. This really follows from the announcement by Caroline Levitt. It says, Trump says he'll decide on Iran's strike within 2 weeks. President Trump will make a decision on action against Iran within the next 2 weeks, the White House said Thursday, based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future. Again, is when you look at it in print, it still seems more head scratching than ever. There's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place. I mean, that's literally meaningless. I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks. And so said Caroline Levitt, who told reporters it was a direct quote from the president. But interestingly, as of this moment, there is nothing posted on Trump's Truth Social account. Usually these announcements are made by Trump himself on Truth Social, but nonetheless, Levitt went out there and said that's a direct quote from him. And then here's the New York Times story. It says, for days, Mr. Trump has mused publicly about the possibility of bombing Iranian nuclear sites, suggesting that strikes could be imminent, while also insisting that it was not too late for talks. With his comments on Thursday, he appeared to opt for some breathing room to give diplomacy a chance. Caroline Levitt, the White House press secretary, said Steve Witkoff, the president's special envoy to the Middle East, has maintained correspondence with Iranian officials. Correspondence. I don't know what kind of correspondence. She declined to provide any further details. And then Iran pulled out of talks with American officials about a nuclear deal after Israel began attacking Iran last week. And then Ms. Levitt said any nuclear deal with Iran would have to include a ban on enriching uranium and block Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Okay, so that's the familiar stance that Trump is now maintaining. After days of back-channel discussions, the Europeans, who have been effectively sidelined since the war started, are now trying to exert what limited leverage they have as weapons suppliers or potential peacemakers to try to end the war. And then at talks in Geneva on Friday, they are expected to urge the Iranians to return to negotiations. This is a classic New York Times. They return to negotiations. They're being bombed. And as Trump is proclaiming it, it's the United States and Israel together are attacking Iran, and they're expected to return to negotiations even as they're being bombed. No, the Europeans are not exerting any pressure on Israel to stop the bombing. It's Iran's obligation to return to negotiations, it was the United States and Israel that circumvented the negotiations by the attacks, even as Mr. Trump mulls the possibility of American military action against Iran. The meeting would be the first formal gathering between Iranian and Western officials since Israel began attacking Iran's nuclear facilities. The diplomatic efforts came as the Israeli military launched its latest wave of strikes on Thursday against targets in Iran, including a nuclear complex. Israel Defense Minister Israel Katz said the country would step up its attacks on Iran to remove the threat to the state of Israel. So Israel Katz is saying they're going to step up the attacks. The Europeans are going to meet the Iranians in Geneva tomorrow to tell them to return to the negotiations, even as Israel steps up its attacks. The threats after a barrage of Iranian missiles hit several locations, including a major hospital complex in southern Israel. We'll talk about this supposed attack on the hospital in a minute. And then here's the fuller story in the Financial Times. It says Europeans to hold last-ditch talks with Iran as Trump weighs entering war. British, French, and German foreign ministers to meet Iranian counterpart on Friday. Britain, France, and Germany are to hold talks with Iran's foreign minister on Friday in a last-ditch effort to avert an escalation of conflict. Escalation? What is this other than an escalation? Escalation of conflict and a possible U.S. intervention. The talks in Geneva, due to be attended by the foreign ministers of the 3 European countries, come in the shadow of warnings from U.S. President Donald Trump that he could join Israel's offensive against Iran. And then we have Keir Starmer. So Keir says it's better to be dealt with by way of negotiations than by way of conflict. The risk of escalation across the region is obvious. Oh, yeah. He added that the UK completely recognized Israel's right to self-defense. Well, that's fantastic. The right to self-defense, which means just do whatever you want to do. But the principle is that we need to de-escalate this. European capitals have been making contingency plans for the U.S. entering the conflict, with tensions raised since Trump publicly acknowledged on Thursday that he may enter the war. So what we're getting here, which makes this more and more interesting, because let's keep in mind that what's really happening. We have Israel that launches this war. It's launching a war knowing that it cannot win this war. It cannot prevail against Iran without the United States entering on its behalf. It cannot do it. It cannot happen because Iran is it's 10 times the size of Israel. Its landmass is I don't know how many more times than the size of Israel's. If there's any attritional war, then Iran will prevail. I mean, this isn't Lebanon, this isn't Gaza, this isn't the West Bank, this isn't Jordan, this isn't Syria. This is a big country. So Netanyahu launches this in the knowledge that he cannot win by himself. So it was done with a view to bringing in the United States. Now, the problem here is that we really don't know how Trump is going to feel about this, because after all, it's the United States that will be on the line here, and And so here was the story that was published again in the New York Times, I think the other day, which tried to explain something that we don't fully have a handle on, is how did it come about that Trump, who has had tense relations with Netanyahu for some time. I mean, remember, Trump and Netanyahu were joined at the hip during his first term, and when they launched, when supposedly these two great allies plotted together to take out Iran General Soleimani, and as is Netanyahu's wont, he left Trump to carry the bag, and Trump wasn't too happy about that. So something very similar is happening today, and Trump knows this. So it was so that we're going to do together with Soleimani. And let's remember, when Trump assassinated Soleimani, there wasn't really any satisfactory, or indeed any kind of an explanation as to why Trump did this. Why was it necessary to kill General Soleimani? I mean, he was an important figure, certainly within the Iranian military. But what was the urgency and to kill him? And why exactly would the United States need to kill him? So the claim subsequently made, oh, he was killing American soldiers in Iraq, which hasn't been proven. Some people have disputed it, but okay, let's not argue about it. Let's say it's true that during the years of the United States occupation of Iraq, American servicemen were being killed by on the orders of General Soleimani. Well, that was an act of defense by Iran. Iran wasn't too happy about an American occupation of the country next door. Iran had opposed this, so the United States had invaded Iraq, and clearly Iran was very troubled for obvious reasons as to why there was an American military presence in Iraq, during which, on Iran's eastern border, there was also an American military occupation of Afghanistan, and so the Iran would have every reason to be very uncomfortable about being surrounded by Americans. And it may well be that General Soleimani had given orders to raise the costs for Americans. And so, but that was years earlier. So if you say that, okay, well, General Soleimani did this to the Americans, yeah, but he assassinated Soleimani in early 2020. We are talking about events that took place 15 years earlier. Why kill Soleimani over something he supposedly did 15 years earlier, other than Trump was basically carrying out instructions from Netanyahu. All of this is coming from Israel. It's Israel that is preoccupied with Iran, and it's Israel that has inflicted its obsessions and its security preoccupations onto the United States. And so here, as I said, let's take a look at this article from the New York Times. This is from the other day. And here we are. Because they're trying to make sense of something that we at the Gaggle have been pondering. Why did Trump suddenly shift his policy. As we said before, he didn't really raise the issue of Iran during the campaign. It certainly didn't seem like anything like his top 10 priorities for his administration. When you think, okay, well, there's immigration, there's tariffs, reindustrialization of America, dismantlement of the administrative state, ending the war in Ukraine, obviously, addressing the issue of rising China. Where's Iran in all of this? This was clearly not a priority for Trump, and yet now this is front and center of the Trump administration. So this is the time story: how Trump shifted on Iran under pressure from Israel. President Trump spent the first month of his term holding back Israel's push for an assault on Iran's nuclear program. With the war underway, his posture has gyrated as he weighs sending in the U.S. military. And then by the end of last month, American spy agencies monitoring Israel's military activities and discussions among the country's political leadership had come to a striking conclusion. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was planning for an imminent attack on Iran's nuclear program with or without the participation of the United States. So they come to this startling conclusion, which is startling. Netanyahu, Israel, a wholly owned dependency of the United States. Israel survives through the huge financial subventions from the United States, huge military transfers from the United States, huge intelligence gathering from the United States, huge diplomatic support from the United States, but apparently there's nothing at all that the United States can do about it. It was going to go in with or without the United States. And then Mr. Netanyahu had spent more than a decade warning that an overwhelming military assault was necessary before Iran reached a point that it could quickly build a nuclear weapon. Yet he had always backed down after multiple American presidents, fearful of the consequences of another conflagration in the Middle East, told him the United States would not assist in an attack. So these multiple presidents were obviously more America first than Trump has proved to be so far. Because these multiple presidents, we're talking about George W. Bush explicitly, and Obama explicitly told him this wasn't on and told him not to do it. But this time, American intelligence assessment was that Mr. Netanyahu was preparing not just a limited strike on the nuclear facilities, but a far more expansive attack that could imperil the Iranian regime itself, and that he was prepared to go it alone. So notice that again, what the Times has said, that the U.S. intelligence has said, well, not only is Israel preparing to attack Iran's nuclear facilities. Israel is planning on regime change. Well, that's quite a tall order. And then again, as the Times presents it, there was nothing that the Americans could do about it. I mean, he's just going to go and do it. We can't stop him from doing it. Now, notice, we can't stop him from doing it. And then, as we're finding, and that's what we've been found during the past week, we are told that the United States has to join in. So the United States has nothing to do with the planning of this mission, has nothing to do with the conception of this project. But once this project has been set in motion, then the United States is obligated to go in and do whatever it can to support Israel. This is very strange. I mean, you're the greatest power in the world, and in a country of 9 million, smaller than Hungary, apparently gets to decide your foreign policy for you. And in a way that's very unfavorable for you, because you haven't had anything to do with the planning, but you nonetheless incur all the costs and perils of this project. So you have to go in. It's got to be done. I mean, listening to all these ranting lunatics, this disgusting lunatics like Mark Levin and Newt Gingrich and Lindsey Graham, just say, "Oh, we got to go in. We got to go. Absolutely got to go in and support Israel." Even though this is an Israel project. This is what the New York Times says. This was an Israel project. The intelligence agencies found out about this and said, "Well, all right. Well, with nothing we can do about it." So here we have, as we go on. So he's prepared to go it alone. The intelligence left President Trump facing difficult choices. He had become invested in a diplomatic push to persuade Iran to give up its nuclear ambitions, and had swatted down one attempt by Mr. Netanyahu in April to convince him that the time was right for a military assault on Iran. During a strained phone call in late May, this is late May, so this is just less than a month ago, Mr. Trump again warned the Israeli leader against a unilateral attack that would short-circuit the diplomacy. So, all right, so we're getting there now. Netanyahu is told in April, no, we're not going to go there. Late May, Trump said, no, we have diplomacy. And he said, okay, well, so how do we get to where we are now? And here we have this bizarre, convoluted logic that the New York Times is going to hit us with. But over the last several weeks, it became increasingly apparent to Trump administration officials that they might not be able to stop Mr. Netanyahu this time, according to interviews with key players in the administration. At the same time, Mr. Trump was getting impatient with Iran over the slow pace of negotiations and beginning to conclude that the talks might go nowhere. Now, the moment the New York Times says, well, it became apparent to them that they might not be able to stop Netanyahu. Why did it become apparent to them? How can you not stop Netanyahu? He depends on you. You get on the phone and say to Netanyahu that if you go there, not only will you receive no support from us, no financial, military, diplomatic support, but we're going to cut off all aid to you. Now you're telling me that wouldn't have worked with Netanyahu? I mean, come on. It's ludicrous. Contrary to Israeli claims, senior administration officials were unaware of any new intelligence showing that Iranians were rushing to build a nuclear bomb, a move that would justify a preemptive strike. Well, so there's no new intelligence, which is what Tulsi Gabbard had said in March. But seeing they would most likely not be able to deter Mr. Again, this bizarre logic. They would most likely would not be able to deter Mr. Netanyahu and were no longer driving events. Mr. Trump advises weighed alternatives. At one end of the spectrum, was sitting back and doing nothing, and then deciding on the next steps once it became clear how much Iran had been weakened by the attack. At the other end was joining Israel in the military assault, possibly to the point of forcing regime change in Iran. And then Mr. Trump chose a middle course, offering Israel as yet undisclosed support from the US intelligence community to carry out its attack, and then turning up the pressure on Tehran to give immediate concessions at the negotiating table or face continued military onslaught. And then 5 days after Israel launched its attack, Mr. Trump's posture continues to gyrate. The administration first distanced itself from the strike, then grew publicly more supportive as Israel's initial military success became evident. So all of this is bizarre. As I say, the idea that the United States can't do anything about Israel is ludicrous. We also know, because we discussed this on Tuesday, that Netanyahu, when pressed by Brett Baer as to, well, what do you have? I mean, what do you have any information that Iran is very close to having nuclear weapons? He said, well, 6 months, 12 months, 13 months, what difference does it make? Which even by Netanyahu's hysterical standards was fairly laid back. I mean, he's been, since 1992, he's been warning how Iran is on the brink of breaking out and having nuclear weapons. So for him to say, well, 6 months, 12 months, 13 months doesn't make any difference. So clearly, even by Netanyahu's own standards, there was no urgency. There was nothing, no event at all to suggest that there was any imminent threat from Iran. Netanyahu was clearly operating on the premise that he has a right doofus in the White House who's going to do for him what George W. Bush and Obama and Biden failed to do. I mean, he's been wanting to attack Iran for decades. He's always been swatted away by American presidents. And now he thinks he's got someone who's going to do it. Now, that's how it looked on Tuesday. But as we started today, Trump seems to be getting cold feet because he's got uproar within his own base. Now he's treating that, I'm America first, I'm the president, I won the election, I'm the one who gets to decide what America first means, and so on. The problem, however, for him is that first of all, if he goes in at the behest of Netanyahu. There's nothing here to suggest that this is in any way America's war. There's no indication at all that Iran poses any kind of danger to the United States. No indication that Iran is any closer to a nuclear weapon than it has been at any time. The urgency, the hysteria that's coming from Netanyahu, and now Trump wants to make it seem as if this is something that is absolutely vital. It's part of America first. Well, it clearly isn't. And here it might be worth taking a look at a couple of clips from the very interesting debate between Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz. The debate is about 2 hours in length, and it's well worth listening to. I mean, it's very entertaining, and you have to, give credit to Ted Cruz. I mean, this was not an easy debate for him, and he was quite a good sport about it. I mean, he didn't get angry or call the debate off, halfway through, even though the debate didn't go particularly well for him. But nonetheless, it's something that's uh, he kind of.
How many people live in Iran, by the way?
Let me pull up this couple of clips from this debate.
How many people live in Iran, by the way?
I don't know the population.
At all?
No, I don't know the population.
You don't know the population of the country you seek to topple?
How many people live in Iran?
92 million.
Okay. Yeah,
How could you not know that?
I don't sit around memorizing population tables.
Well, it's kind of relevant because you're calling for the overthrow of the government.
Why is it relevant whether it's,
because
it's 90 million or 80 million or 100 million? Why is
because
that
if
relevant?
you don't know anything about the country...
I didn't say I don't know anything about
Okay, what's the ethnic mix of Iran?
They are Persians and
What percent?
predominantly Shia. Okay,
it's not
okay.
even... You don't know anything about Iran, so
Okay,
actually
I
the
am
country...
not the Tucker Carlson
No, but
expert on Iran.
You're a
who
senator
says,
who's calling
okay,
for the
you're the one
overthrow
who
of the
claims-
government,
you're the
and
one
you
who
don't know
claims-
anything about the country.
No, you don't know anything about the country. You're the one who claims they're not trying to murder Donald Trump.
No,
You're the
I'm
one
not saying that.
who can't figure out
I'm
if it was a
saying
good
you
idea to
don't
kill
believe-
General Soleimani, and you said it was bad.
believe they're trying to murder Trump.
Yes, I do.
Because you're not calling for military strikes against them in retaliation. And if you really
we
believe
are
that...
carrying out military strikes today.
You said Israel was.
Right, with our help. I said we. Israel is leading them, but we're supporting them.
Well, you're breaking news here because the U.S. government last night denied, the National Security Council spokesman Alex Pfeiffer denied on behalf of Trump that we were acting on Israel's behalf in any offensive
No,
capacity.
we're not
at all.
bombing them. Israel's bombing them.
You just said we were.
We are supporting
This is high
Israel. As
stakes. You're a senator. If you're saying the United States government is at
No,
war with Iran right now, people are listening.
All right, so that was very instructive because, of course, I wasn't expecting Ted Cruz to admit that he really didn't know the size of Iran's population. Now, there was obviously an attempt to present afterwards that, oh, this was a gotcha question and so on. But of course, it wasn't a gotcha question because the size of Iran is highly relevant if you're going to go to a war against the country. I mean, you really, if you're going to go to war, start bombing, you got to figure out, well, what are their resources? What can they call upon in order to wage their war? So if there's a population of 10 million or there's a population of 90 million, that makes a difference. You don't want to start planning for a war when you don't know the resources that are at a country's disposal. And given that Ted Cruz has been droning on about Iran really pretty much since the start of his political career, when he first was elected to Congress, which I think was in 2012. He's been a stalwart, obsessive on the subject of Iran, and so that was a revealing moment. But of course, it's true of so many of the sort of gung ho politicians who make all of these declarations about foreign countries, how this and that leader has to go, but without knowing the first thing about the countries. I remember Tucker had this when he was still on Fox, and this was at the height of the Syria hysteria. Assad must go hysteria, and he had some politician. I can't remember who it was, and Tucker asked him, reasonably, okay, you want Assad to go? Who will replace Assad? I said, well, I don't know. Well, he goes, I mean, what kind of, do you have any kind of group of people in mind who are going to take over from Assad? I said, well, the Kurds. So that's all he really knew about Syria. Well, there were the Kurds. The Kurds are supposedly the good guys. They're the people we're supposed to support. So I said, the Kurds. So here was some politician, I can't remember whether he was a Republican or a Democrat, it doesn't really make any difference, who was declaring that the Kurds are going to run Syria. Why would the Kurds, a minority in Syria, be trusted to run Syria, particularly as it would hardly be acceptable to the Turkish giant next door? And the Turks aren't going to accept a Kurdish-run Syria. But that's it. He just had no idea. So there he is. He's sounding off, issuing these press releases, issuing statements to the media, going on, on all these giving interviews about Syria. Assad must go, and he really, hadn't even got to the next step, which was, and replaced by whom? I mean, even at the time of the Iraq invasion, I mean, the neocons had come up with a name. Who will replace Saddam Hussein? They said, oh yeah, Ahmed Chalabi. I bet no one now remembers Ahmed Chalabi because he ran something in Washington, totally funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, the U.S. government and so on. So he ran this entity called the Iraqi National Congress, and all the AEI and all the cheerleaders for the Iraq invasion, including Christopher Hitchens, were touting the virtues of Ahmed Chalabi. Yeah, Chalabi is the guy who was going to take over from Saddam Hussein. Well, of course, Chalabi, of course, had no following whatsoever inside Iraq. The only following he ever had was in Washington, and Washington paid him handsomely. So when he was parachuted into Iraq, it was clear from the beginning that he had no following in Iraq, and he was parachuted out very quickly. That was, but in this case, so here is Ted Cruz talking about regime change, and he doesn't even know what the population is. Now, if you're going to go to war with a country that has a population of 92 million, a very substantial energy industry, well, you got a problem on your hands. That's going to be a tough war to win, short of a full-blown invasion. And I'm not at all sure that there's going to be much enthusiasm in the United States for a full-blown invasion. But let's just go on a little bit more with the
growing up
the Tucker interview, which is, as I say, quite interesting. Yep. Let's see. Okay, so here it is.
Growing up in Sunday school, I was taught from the Bible, those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. And from my perspective, I want to be on the blessing side of things.
Of those who bless the government of Israel?
Those who bless Israel is what it says. It doesn't say the government of it, says the nation of Israel. So that's in the Bible. As a Christian, I believe that.
Where is that?
I can find it to you. I don't have the scripture off the tip of my. You pull out the phone and use the.
It's in Genesis. So you're quoting a Bible phrase. You don't have context for it and you don't know where in the Bible it is, but that's like your theology? I'm confused. What does that even mean?
Tucker.
I'm a Christian. I want to know what you're talking about.
Okay. Where does my support for Israel come from? Number one, because biblically we're commanded to support Israel. But number two,
hold on. You're a senator, and now you're throwing out theology, and I am a Christian, and I am allowed to weigh in on this. We are commanded as Christians to support the government of Israel?
We are commanded to support Israel. And what
does that mean, Israel?
We're told those who bless Israel will be blessed.
But hold on, define Israel. This is important. Are you kidding? this majority Christian country.
Define Israel. Do you not know what Israel is? That would be the country you've asked like 49 questions about.
So that's what Genesis. That's what God is talking about.
The nation of Israel, yes.
And is that the current borders, the current leadership? He's talking about the political entity called Israel.
He's talking about the nation of Israel. Yet nations exist, and he's discussing a nation. A nation was the people of Israel.
Is the nation
They're the descendants
God's
of
referring
Abraham
to in Genesis? Is that the same as the country run by Benjamin Netanyahu right now?
Yes.
So that's quite a let me just that's it's quite a packet from Ted Cruz. I mean, first of all, he's talking about what from Genesis, for which there's no historical record. Now you could say it's a sacred text, and there doesn't have to be any historical record. But basically, almost everything that's in the Old Testament, and particularly the book of Genesis, is just fiction. I mean, there's simply no historical evidence in existence that supports any of the claims made in the Old Testament. Or New Testament come to that, but particularly the Old Testament. So this was, it's a religious text, it's a sacred text, so different criteria apply. But if you're going to use it for political reasons, then you absolutely, at the minimum, have to have to present some kind of historical evidence, even if the evidence of what happened thousands and thousands of years ago, and the relevance of that to current events is somewhat dubious. But particularly when you start talking about the Bible and about the book of Genesis, then you think, well, what? I mean, you're talking about something that's fictional, and you're basing your arguments on essentially a work of fiction. And then when Tucker pressed him, well, what do you mean by Israel? I mean, what is that entity? It's the same entity that was created after World War II. That's the same state of Israel that God was talking about in Genesis. It's an amazingly bizarre argument. But as we were talking the other day, it's not dissimilar to the arguments that were made by Mike Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, a very apocalyptic view. And here is Ted Cruz talking about, well, you have to be, support Israel. And again, what Tucker say, okay, support Israel. Does that mean the government of Israel? You mean Netanyahu? That's your obligation to support Netanyahu? The Israel within its borders, or what Israel is he talking about? But it is a reflection of the peculiar grip that Israel has over the domestic American political scene. So, and that's why when I was when there are discussions take place, Israel is part of American global hegemony, and that Israel serves as a mechanism for the United States to rule over the world, to rule over the Middle East, to rule over the Eurasian landmass. I'm just, I don't buy that thesis. Israel does nothing at all to strengthen America's position. America's position in the Middle East would be infinitely stronger if it weren't for Israel. Israel stands in the way of America having normal relations with most of the Arab world. And when you then examine, well, what's the basis of this this hold that Israel has? When then we listen to Ted Cruz. And he said, well, this is what he studied in Sunday school. Or what Mike Huckabee said when we were talking about it the other day, where you have to listen to the word of God. You will be guided by God. So Israel really does nothing at all to advance America's geopolitical agenda. And if it weren't for Israel, the United States would have normal relations with almost all of the countries in the Middle East, in the Persian Gulf, with the countries of West Asia, and so you see this here we have the peculiarities of it. Now, there's a couple of other stories that came out today. Now, one story was mentioned, was this attack supposed attack by Iran on a hospital. And this is the moment when the media get hysterical and indignant and horrified because Iran showed its essential savagery, and by attacking. Can you imagine attacking a hospital? Now, there was always a couple of things about it. In the first place, I mean, anyone who's been following the events in Gaza would know all of the times that Israel has attacked hospitals, inflicting severe casualties, many deaths, and all premised on Israel's claims, never substantiated, that under this hospital there was a Hamas headquarters, or the ambulances in the hospital were transporting Hamas fighters and whatever. And again, never proven that that's what was happening. But whenever Israel attacked a hospital, on come all the IDF spokesmen, and they would all listen to them. It was a Hamas headquarters, the ambulance that was transferring Hamas. And all of these claims, were just invariably accepted. Or at most, well, this is what Israel says. This is what the health authority, the Gaza health authority says, and so, well, okay, well, who knows what's true? But today we've had this hysteria all day about this Iranian attack on a hospital in southern Israel. CNN, every hour on the hour they would do another in-person report by one of their clownish reporters. This is the hospital. And they admit in these reports, and they show all this rubble, that no one was killed. No one in the hospital was killed. Basically, there was some rubble. There were broken windows, glass blown out, but no one was killed, which is very different from the Israeli attacks on the hospitals in Gaza. But, and this is an important point, it became clear that Iran never targeted the hospital. What damage the hospital sustained was due to the impact of the explosion. It was just simply the vibrations from the explosion that caused the damage. And for this, one only has to go to the Times of Israel, and here is their report, and says there that Iran claims ballistic missile that hit hospital targeted adjacent IDF base. There is no military facility nearby. However, It's not quite true. It says Iran claims that the ballistic missile that hit Beersheba Soroka's hospital was in fact targeting an adjacent military intelligence facility. So they said it's a military intelligence facility. There are no Israeli military facilities in the vicinity of the Soroka hospital. The IDF Southern Command base is located over 2 kilometers away. Okay, so that's 2 kilometers away. That's pretty close. I mean, 2 kilometers away. That's not too far. But in any case, and there were other reports that said that the missile did not hit the hospital. The damage to the hospital was due to the vibrations from the explosion. That's it. That's why there were no casualties, just other than some rubble and some broken windows. But basically, there was so very different from the Israeli attacks on the hospitals in Gaza, which get minimal Western media coverage, and then we had this hysteria, this hour upon hour, particularly on CNN, of this reports from the hospital. So that's that. Now the the question still is, and which is like, why exactly is the United States, may or may not, as Trump puts it, eager to get into this fight with Iran on behalf of Israel? Remember, the media are presenting the story as stunning Israeli successes. One success after another. Oh, they've taken out the military leadership. They've taken out the intelligence leadership. The military leadership was replaced by new people, and now the new people have been killed off by Israel. Israel is just fantastic. They killed all these scientists. They killed, they attacked the military facilities, the Natas, and so on. So absolutely wonderful. They're doing really great. Now, the question then is, all right, well, if they are doing great, why this pressure on America to get in? I mean, this makes very little sense. I mean, if Israel is just, whack, boom, thump, then why do we need America? Let Israel then just finish Iran off, and no need for any real escalation. But of course, that's the answer to the question. That's no one really answers that question, because Levin and the rest of them who are whipping up this hysteria for the need for American intervention aren't able to just to address this very basic logical point. If Israel is doing so well and is giving Iran a jolly good hiding, then why should America get involved? Given all the perils, and given all Trump's promises, and all the America First assumptions that there'll be no more stupid Middle East wars, why then do we need to get involved? Now, the argument is then presented, we need the bunker buster bombs, the B-2s, which deliver these bunker buster bombs. I just like the alliteration. B-2s with the bunker buster bombs, which can take out the Fordo site. Is deep underground, and therefore only the United States can do it. Israel cannot do it. Now, that question also raises the next question, which is, well, if Netanyahu knew that Israel did not have the capability to destroy this Fordo nuclear facility underground, and he knew that only the United States had the military capability to do that, why exactly did he launch this attack? I mean, you don't normally launch a military operation and expect that somebody else is going to come in at a later stage, or in this case, at a very early stage. Because Netanyahu had to have known, since everybody seems to know, that Israel does not have the capability to destroy the Fordo nuclear facility. So all along, the plan was to get the United States in. Now, for people like Mark Levin, Ted Cruz, Newt Gingrich, and the rest, think, they just think, well, that's very reasonable. It's perfectly appropriate for the United States to fight Israel's wars. Yeah, that's what you're supposed to do. That's the role of the United States, to fight Israel's wars for it. But irrespective, when you say, well, what's that got to do with America first? Well, America first is what Trump defines it as. So that's the one possibility. Okay, there's the Fordo, and America has to come in and do this job, because, of course, if it doesn't, if basically Israel is unable to destroy it and Fordo survives, then essentially not only does Iran's nuclear program survive, it's very likely that Iran then will make a decision, as any rational political leadership would make such a decision, of developing nuclear weapons. They can't sit on their hands and be attacked like this again. I mean, that's what you'd have to do. So the failure of taking out Fordo would be quite consequential. Namely, Iran will finally become that which you tried to prevent. Iran would become a nuclear weapons state. So that would obviously that obviously is a part of the pressure that Trump is coming under. Hey, you can't allow Iran to prevail, because then Iran will have won. Now, the other aspect of it, which is in a way even more, I don't know, troubling, is that not only was it impossible for Israel to take out Fordo from the beginning, and Netanyahu knew from the beginning that he wouldn't be able to do it, but that Israel really didn't have the capability to prevail in any lengthy war of attrition against Iran. So it was always, it's not just we need the Americans to take out Fordo. We need America to help us in this, this possibly lengthy war. So here are some interesting stories on this. So here, this is a Wall Street Journal. It says, Israel is running low on defensive interceptors, officials say. A shortage of Arrow interceptors has set off a scramble to augment Israel's defenses. So here, this is a problem, and we've talked about this before, whether Israel has sufficient number of interceptors to be able to hold off on Iran's missiles. Iran seems to have the missiles. So whatever Israel did or did not achieve during the first days of its attacks, it hasn't taken out all of Iran's missiles or Iran's missile launchers. So here then, as the journal goes on, Israel is running low on defensive arrow interceptors, according to a U.S. official, raising concern about the country's ability to counter long-range ballistic missiles from Iran if the conflict isn't resolved soon. The U.S. has been aware of the capacity problems for months, the official said, and Washington has been augmenting Israel's defenses with systems on the ground, at sea, and in the air. Since the conflict escalated in June, the Pentagon has sent more missile defense assets into the region, and now there is concern about the U.S. burning through interceptors as well. So just think about this. It says the U.S. has been aware of the capacity problems for months. Washington has been augmenting Israel's defenses with systems on the ground. But there is concern about the U.S. burning through interceptors as well. So Israel launched this attack knowing something that the Americans had known, that it has a limited capacity to counter long-range ballistic missiles from Iran. So Israel knew this and still went ahead. And went ahead at the time when Netanyahu, as he made clear to Brett Baer, there was nothing special that happened. There was nothing at all that that altered the security situation in any way at all. 6 months, 12 months, 13 months, who cares, is what Netanyahu said. And then it says, neither the US nor the Israelis can continue to sit and intercept missiles all day, said Tom Caraco, director of the Missile Defense Project at the CSIS. The Israelis and their friends need to move with all deliberate haste to do whatever needs to be done, because we cannot afford to sit and play catch. So notice the urgency here. The Israelis and their friends need to move with all deliberate haste to do whatever needs to be done, because we cannot afford to sit and play catch. So in other words, Israel has a real serious problem on its hands, and it's up to the United States to get Israel out of this situation. Israel Aerospace Industries, the company that makes Arrow interceptors, didn't respond to requests for comment. The Israel Defense Forces said in a statement, the IDF is prepared and ready to handle any scenario. Unfortunately, we are unable to comment on matters related to munitions. And then here's the New York Times, playing catch up as always. Will Israel's interceptors outlast Iran's missiles? The answer may shape the war. Israel has a world-leading missile interception system, but its bank of interceptors is finite. And then, aside from a potentially game-changing American intervention that shapes the fate of Iran's nuclear program, two factors will help decide the length of the Israel-Iran war: Israel's reserve of missile interceptors and Iran's stock of long-range missiles. Since Iran started retaliating against Israel's fire last week, Israel's world-leading air defense system has intercepted most incoming Iranian ballistic missiles, giving Israeli Air Force more time to strike Iran without incurring major losses at home. And then, now as the war drags on, Israel is firing interceptors faster than it can produce them. Okay, oh dear. That has raised questions within the Israeli security establishment about whether the country will run low on air defense missiles before Iran uses up its ballistic arsenal. That's a kind of a problem. You really want to know something like that before you embark on an act of aggression? Do you have uh, enough interceptors to take care of your adversary's missiles? Already, Israel's military has had to conserve its use of interceptors and is giving greater priority to the defense of densely populated areas and strategic infrastructure. And then goes on. No Israeli official would divulge the number of interceptors left at Israel's disposal. The revelation of such a closely guarded secret could give Iran a military advantage. The answer will affect Israel's ability to sustain a long-term attritional war. The nature of the war will partly be decided by whether President Trump decides to join Israel in attacking Iran's nuclear enrichment site at Fordo, or whether Iran decides to give up its enrichment program to prevent such an intervention. So it all hangs on. So this answer, with this issue of the interceptors and the missiles, the issue, who's going to outlast whom, will ultimately be decided by Trump. And then some Israelis feel it is time to wrap up the war before Israel's defenses are tested too severely. At least 24 civilians have been killed by Iran strikes, and more than 800 have been injured. Some key infrastructure, including oil refineries in northern Israel, has been hit, along with civilian homes and so on. Already high by Israel standards, the death toll could rise sharply if the Israeli military is forced to limit its general use of interceptors in order to guarantee the long-term protection of a few strategic sites, like the Dimona nuclear reactor in southern Israel or the military headquarters in Tel Aviv. So just read that again. Already high by Israeli standards, the death toll could rise sharply if the Israeli military is forced to limit its general use of interceptors in order to guarantee the long-term protection of a few strategic sites like the Dimona nuclear reactor in southern Israel or the military headquarters in Tel Aviv. So here we can see that there's real concern about possible attacks on the Dimona nuclear reactor. That's obviously a key priority for Israel to protect. And then military headquarters in Tel Aviv. So when you read these kind of stories, it's becoming clearer and clearer that the need to bring the United States in isn't just about Fordo, but it is to ensure that Israel can prevail against Iran. A war Israel started and is clearly having some problems in securing a desirable outcome. Hence the pressure on Trump. That's why this pressure is continuing to build on Trump to get involved. And so with the events of today, it seems like Trump is getting a little fed up with this pressure and saying, well, negotiations may or may not happen, and in any case, I'm going to decide something within the next 2 weeks. Now, of course, with Trump, you always have to keep in mind that nothing he ever says is to be taken at face value, because he may well change his view by later today. We simply we just don't know. So we can always say, "Oh, this is the definitive statement from Trump." Well, no particular reason why it would be the definitive statement from Trump. But what it does suggest is that he's getting cold feet about going in. But you can see from all of this that the Israel First lobby is quite concerned about the condition of Israel. Now, in the meantime, we have Russia. Now, Russia's role is always very, very you know, enigmatic. Let's say. So we had the whole Russia in January. Russia and Iran signed a strategic partnership, and we talked about it at the time, which basically amounted to nothing. It's just blah blah blah. The usual stuff. But neither Iran nor Russia was obligated to come in on one another's side in the event of either state being in a war. All that was required in this strategic partnership was that neither Russia nor Iran will come in against the other should the other find himself in a war with another state. In other words, thank you very much. Russia promises that it will not join Israel in attacking Iran, and Iran in turn promises that it's not going to join Ukraine in attacking Russia. But that's pretty much the sum and substance of their strategic partnership. But it is true that since last Thursday, when Israel launched these attacks, Russia has condemned Israel in quite harsh terms, but without indicating that it was going to do anything at all for Iran. Or even indicating that he was going to bring any kind of a resolution before the UN Security Council. Well, of course, it would be vetoed, but nonetheless, Russia made no move to bring in a UN Security Council resolution, which could have made at least some difference, but it hasn't. It's clearly made no move. The BRICS countries, part of this multipolarity. This is the multipolar world. The things that Lavrov is always talking about every time he goes somewhere. Multipolarity. So the BRICS countries have also said nothing, which is quite remarkable because Iran joined BRICS at the start of this year. So Iran is now a member of BRICS, and yet BRICS seem to say nothing. No condemnation of Israel's attack. So today, I think was it today? No, I think it was yesterday. I think Putin was at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, and he was asked about what's your stance on this war between Israel and Iran. And let's see what he said. So here, this is a question from Simon Robinson from Reuters, and he says, "I have a question about Iran. Prime Minister Netanyahu said that an Israeli attack on Iran could lead to regime change. Donald Trump called for Iran's unconditional surrender. Do you agree with the Prime Minister of Israel and with the President of the United States?" And then Putin says, "I don't quite understand your question. I agree with what?" That's fair enough. I mean, it's not clear what he means, but do you agree with what? Okay. What do you want me to agree with or not? They said this and that, and then you ask, do you agree with this or that? Okay, fair enough. And then Robinson says, do you agree with their assessment that this could lead to regime change and that Iran should prepare for unconditional surrender. And so Putin says, well, as you know, Russia and I personally are in contact with the Prime Minister of Israel, and on this issue, in contact with President Trump. It's always necessary to look at whether the goal is being achieved or not when starting something. Well, something Putin himself should keep in mind, but okay. We see that today in Iran, despite the complexity of the internal political processes taking place there. We know about this, and I think there's no point in going into detail, but still there's a consolidation of society around the country's political leadership. This happens almost always and everywhere, and Iran is no exception. That's the first thing. Okay, so he's saying basically the chances of achieving regime change in Iran by attacking it is very slim, because when you attack a country, the populace kind of rallies around the government. Again, something he might have thought about might happen in Ukraine, but all right, let's leave that for another day. And then he goes on. The second thing is very important. Everyone is talking about this. I will only repeat what we know and hear from all sides. These underground plants, they exist. Nothing has happened to them. Okay, so I mean, that's Fordo he's talking about, but he's talking about something else as well here. Nothing has happened. And in that regard, it seems to me that it would be right for everyone to look for ways to stop the hostilities and find ways for all parties to this conflict to reach an agreement with each other in order to ensure both the interests of Iran on the one hand for its nuclear activities, including peaceful nuclear activities, of course. I mean both peaceful nuclear energy and peaceful nuclear energy in other areas, and to ensure the interests of Israel from the point of view of the unconditional security of the Jewish state. This is he has condemned, his government has condemned in quite severe terms Israel's actions, that this was an unprovoked aggression. And then he says, well, they should sort of come out in agreement. We have the unconditional security of the Jewish state, and then we have Iran's need for peaceful nuclear energy. Now, no country in the world, including Russia, is entitled to unconditional security. I mean, that just doesn't happen. And this is kind of why we get into these situations with Israel, is that Israel alone is entitled to ask for unconditional security and is therefore entitled to act unconditionally against everyone. And if Iran, as he seems to be suggesting, is engaged in peaceful nuclear activities, then why exactly has it been subjected to unprovoked aggression? So he says this is a delicate issue, and of course we need to be very careful here. But in my opinion, in general, such a solution can be found. Well, that's great. Such a solution can be found. Fantastic. And then says, as you know, we at one time picked up a project in Iran that was being carried out by German companies and completed the Bushehr nuclear power plant. Okay, so there's the nuclear power plant in Iran. The German companies left. The Iranians asked us to continue. It was difficult because what the German specialists did was their design, and Rosatom had to make a lot of effort to adapt it all to the Russian design block. But nevertheless, we did it, and this unit is working successfully. Okay, so this is the nuclear power plant. It's working successfully. We have signed a contract for the construction of 2 more units. The work is underway, and our specialists are on site. Okay, so it's a nuclear power plant. Construction is underway. Our specialists, Russian specialists, are on site, over 200 people. We agreed with the Israeli leadership that their safety will be ensured. So this is quite interesting. So he has got a commitment from Netanyahu not to attack the Bushehr nuclear power plant because there are 200 Russians employed there. Their safety will be ensured. In general, it seems to me that bearing in mind Iran's plans to continue using and developing peaceful nuclear energy, this is also applicable in the field of agriculture, in the field of medicine, and so on. But this is not nuclear energy, and in nuclear energy, we could work together with Iran. Why do I think so? Because the level of trust between our countries is quite high. We have very good relations with Iran. We could continue this work and ensure their interests in this area. I will not go into details now. There are many of them, and we discussed all these details with both the Israeli side and the American side. In this way, we also sent certain signals to our Iranian friends, and in general, it's possible to ensure Iran's interest in the area of peaceful nuclear energy and at the same time to remove Israel's concerns regarding its security. And then he goes on, in my opinion, there are such options. We have outlined them. I repeat to all our partners, to the US, to Israel, and we have conveyed them to Iran. We are not imposing anything on anyone. We are simply talking about how we see a possible way out of the situation. But the decision, of course, is up to the political leadership of all these countries, primarily Iran and Israel. Now, all of this is quite interesting because it does seem that Trump really wants to make use of Russia somehow. He hasn't quite figured out how, but he wants to make use of Russia to act as a mediator. I'm not sure mediator between whom, between Iran and Israel, between Iran and the United States, but he wants Russia to help out in some way. And indeed, he came out strongly the other day against any additional new, or at least new sanctions against Russia. He left the G7 a day early so as not to meet Zelensky, and he at this stage, I mean, again, can't really think too far ahead. But at this stage, Trump really doesn't want to add any additional burdens on Russia. I think you'd have to think he wants Russia to help out in some way. And Putin seems to be suggesting that he is willing to help out. Now, the relationship between Russia and Israel is a very peculiar one. I mean, if that's true, what he says, that Israel has given this pledge, we're not going to attack the Bushehr nuclear power plant because there are Russians there, then it goes back to this situation with Israel. Israel has a very substantial Jewish population who came from Russia. And unlike the Jews in the United States who loathe Russia, with a passion, they think about the Cossacks, they think about the Tsars, the pogroms, or whether they think about the Bolsheviks and the Soviets and so on, but they have a loathing, absolute loathing for Russia. The Jews in Israel don't have those feelings about Russia. They feel that they have a certain nostalgia and a fondness for Russia. They kind of like Russian culture. And I think Netanyahu is sensitive to that, and that's why he does have this peculiar relationship with Russia. And you have to keep in mind, when it comes to Russia, Netanyahu does not follow NATO foreign policy. He has maintained cordial relations throughout the years of war in Ukraine. He has maintained cordial relations with Russia. And again, which is just more evidence of the fact that Israel is not there, to advance the foreign policy agenda of the West. Just, Israel has its own agenda. If it pursues that, it knows how to play the game in the West. It's master of public relations. But that doesn't mean that Israel in any way advances the goals of the West. So that's why Putin is suggesting that he's willing to act as a mediator. And I don't know how that's going to work, because you still have these two completely incompatible positions, which is no enrichment, which is coming from the Americans and the Israelis, and Iran insisting that it has the right under the Non-Proliferation Treaty to enrich. So that's going to be a hard one. But if Putin were to act as a mediator, then I would think Putin will ask for a price. He will demand a price from the United States. And that would be, well, I'm going to try and get you off the hook on this, just as I got Obama off the hook on Syria. Remember, Obama was in a real problem. He had committed himself to bombing Syria. He didn't really want to do it, and he'd been told by his intelligence people that we don't have any evidence that this chemical weapons attack was actually perpetrated by Bashar al-Assad. And now, but you've pledged to start bombing. And then Putin swooped in and helped out Obama by committing Syria to total disarmament of its chemical weapons stockpile, which of course weakened Syria, because now it didn't really have anything in the tank. But that was, so Putin did that for Obama. And Putin may be thinking in terms of doing something similar for Trump, but he might ask for a price. Putin seemed to forget asking for a price for helping out Obama. In fact, Obama gave him nothing. Obama, in the very next year, Obama helped sponsor the coup in Kiev. So Putin got nothing out of that deal. So now I would think Russia would ask something in return from Trump, if he can deliver, and it's possible he might be able to deliver something. I don't know, because he unlike the United States, has an entree both with is the Israelis and with the Iranians. I mean, the Iranians do, regard the Russians as at least as colleagues. So that's a possibility. That he's got this pledge from Netanyahu not to attack the Bushehr nuclear power plant, and he's maintaining his contacts with the Iranians. However, and this got quite interesting, it's clear that he's not going to be providing any additional weapon systems to Iran. Just go back to that meeting in St. Petersburg. He's asked. Let's just go on. So here we have this, somebody asked, if tomorrow Israel, with or without the help of the US, simply kills Khamenei, what will be your reaction and Russia's reaction and your first actions? This is the first part of the question. And then Putin says, if you allow me, I hope this will be the most correct answer to your question. I do not even wish to discuss such a possibility. I do not want to. He kind of got himself out of that question. The question was a reasonable one, but he got himself, I don't even want to talk about it. All right. But they themselves are openly discussing this. Mr. Trump, Mr. Netanyahu, again, very reasonable follow-up. And then Putin says, yeah, I hear all this, but I don't even want to discuss it. And then he goes on, all right, the second part of my question concerns Iran. There is a strategic partnership agreement between Russia and Iran. It does not provide for Russia's protection of Iran, but there is still the issue of weapons. Given the severity of the situation now, are you prepared to provide new types of weapons to Iran so that they can defend themselves against Israeli attacks? Quite pertinent, because you do have a strategic partnership agreement, and we have been talking about those S-400 anti-ballistic missile defense systems. And then Putin says, we once offered our Iranian friends to work in the area of air defense systems. At that time, our partners did not show much interest, and that was it, which seems very odd. And then it says, as for the strategic partnership treaty that you mentioned, there are no articles related to the defense sphere. Oh, that's nice. So it's a strategic partnership, but we kind of forgot to add any articles that said anything about defense sphere. Oh, okay. I guess we'll have another one in a few years' time. So that's the second thing. Third, our Iranian friends don't ask us about this. Well, they don't. So they're not interested in getting the most advanced anti-missile defense systems. So there's practically nothing to discuss. Okay. Then you did, if I'm not mistaken, deliver the S-300 and the modified S-200. So in terms of air defense, Russia plays a role in protecting Iran. Good question. Yeah, so you said that we're not involved, but what about the S-300 and then before that, the S-200? Putin says, that's not it at all, because our proposal is different, to create systems, not individual deliveries, but systems. We discussed this at one time, but the Iranian side did not show much interest in this, and it all died down. As for individual deliveries, yes, of course, we carried out these deliveries at one time. This is in no way connected with the current crisis. This was what is called regular cooperation in the military technical sphere and within the framework of international norms. Neither Iran asked us for anything that would violate the known norms signed by the Russian Federation, nor did we do anything. We always remain within the framework of the international normative base. Anything else? All right. So now, there's a lot of the alt media types that I don't have much time for, have been going on for, months, I'll say months, claiming without any evidence that Russia had provided Iran with the S-400 anti-ballistic missile defense system. The most advanced. They got the S-400. They're absolutely superb, first rate, and Iran has them. Now, I was always very skeptical of this for an obvious reason. If Russia were to provide Iran with the S-400s, then its good friend Israel would be very unhappy about this. Now, remember, the issue of Syria has been boiling for years and years and years, and because Israel, on a regular basis, used to bomb Syria. And question arose: hey, well, if Syria is supposed to be a great ally, why don't you provide Syria with proper defensive systems? And Russia never did. I mean, I think Syria had those S-200s, but not not I think the modified version. But in any case, those S-200 didn't seem to make any real impression, and Israel will still manage to bomb Syria at will. So that's your great ally, Syria. So they got nothing. And if Russia were to provide the S-400s to Iran, then Netanyahu would be less than pleased. So here they were here with these probing questions. Well, what are you going to do? I mean, you've condemned what Israel has done. You've signed this strategic partnership agreement. Are you going to provide any additional defensive system? Now, admittedly, at this late stage, it probably isn't going to make any difference, because at the minimum, you need a lot of training, which could take months, if not years, a lot of training to be able to operate, these highly sophisticated missile defense systems. So, but it hasn't been done in all this time, even though the likelihood of an Israeli-U.S. attack on Iran, had been quite strong for many years. But nonetheless, Russia hasn't done this, and now it's obviously too late. But kind of Putin just kind of seemed to just duck the question. Said, "Oh well, we're talking about something else," and the Iranians weren't very interested, and the S-300, well, that's a long time ago, and whatever. So that tells you that Russia is very keen on maintaining its good relations with both Israel and Iran. Now, maybe Russia will be able to act as some kind of a mediator for Trump. I have my doubts. I saw nothing in that those comments by Putin that indicated, well, how are you going to address the central problem? One side says no enrichment, and the other side says we retain the right of enrichment. There's nothing, under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So, well, we'll see. But but it's not impossible that Trump will try to cajole Putin into acting as some kind of a mediator, just to get him off the hook. Because it does look, at least from the statement today, that Trump is trying to find a way out. Because he's sort of boxed himself in. He doesn't seem very keen on this, and he's trying to find a way out. And maybe Russia could be that way out. But we'll see. Anyway, let's go to our locals page to look at the comments made by our locals community, the Gagglers local community, the people who maintain the dogs in the life that they're accustomed. And so here we have Robert. Always good to hear from you, Robert. And Robert from New Jersey, where today hail and tornadoes are in the forecast. Huh. Hail and tornadoes. Wow, you've got some very vibrant, vigorous weather there in New Jersey. Huh. Well, and then as if to sync up New Jersey weather and the cataclysm of world events even more. It looks like it. Yeah, New Jersey as the radical exemplar of the lack of a world order. Anyway, Robert then goes on. AIPAC emerged in the early 1950s from the American Zionist Committee for Public Affairs, just after Israel's 1948 founding, signaling a long-term plan to steer U.S. policy. Its name was crafted to mask its role as a de facto foreign lobby. De facto foreign lobby. Now, Ted Cruz, like Chris Christie's occupied territories gaffe, slipped on Tucker Carlson, calling it the American Israeli Political Action Committee. So, okay, a flub that accidentally said the quiet part out loud. Yeah, I think that's very interesting. Now, it's an AIPAC is obviously it's a lobbying organization on behalf of the Israeli government. That's what it does. But it isn't quite a foreign agent. I mean, a foreign agent has to be receiving money from abroad. In other words, I mean, let's say you're a foreign agent on behalf of, I don't know, Turkey, say, you have to be receiving money from the Turkish government or significant Turkish figures. That means you're a foreign agent, and you have to register under FARA as a foreign agent. But AIPAC doesn't get money from Israel. I mean, the key thing to remember about Israel is a money receiving operation. It's not a money giving operation. Israel does not contribute money to anyone. Nobody gets a penny from Israel. Israel receives money from the United States, from the US government, from wealthy US donors. It receives money from the European Union, receives money from Germany. It basically receives money from the rest of the world. It doesn't give anyone anything. So, I mean, it's understandable people get frustrated as to why AIPAC doesn't count as a foreign agent. But in fact, it isn't really foreign. I mean, it is a domestic lobbying arm for the Israeli government. It's there to apply pressure against politicians to make sure that they keep in line and stick to the Israeli agenda. That's how it operates, and the politicians are terrified of crossing AIPAC because AIPAC can generate opposition to the politicians in the media, and of course they can fund primary opponents. And there have been over the years, any number of critics of Israel, all of whose political careers ended badly. And that's what AIPAC has been doing. And so, but it's not quite a foreign agent. I mean, in the way that the FARA has been drafted. Anyway, Robert, thank you so much for your generosity. Really appreciate it. And of course, we appreciate all your really interesting comments. Vic Shakapopoulos. Oh, no question today about Cyprus. Okay. Dear George, do you think China will let the last West Asian country that is not yet in the American orbit fall into it? Do they also have a Zionist lobby in Beijing that is constraining them? Also, what do you think about the idea that, as in the case of the Ukrainian war, there are many influential parties that would like to prolong the conflict on a low, medium intensity just for $5? Russia, for example, or even Netanyahu and the Ayatollahs themselves? That's a very good question. My view is China isn't going to do anything for anyone. I mean, that's basically that's the Chinese thing. I mean, Chinese, they're only concerned about themselves. making as much money as they can, wiping out any industrial rivals around the world. That's what they've been doing all these years. I mean, with their policy of tariffs, with their intellectual property theft. That's what they're concerned with. So I don't think Iran matters to them. Now, it's true that they get a lot of oil from Iran, and that certainly is an issue for them. But ultimately, there's no shortage of oil in the world. I mean, if you lose Iran as your source of oil, you're going to get oil from somewhere else. I mean, there's an oil glut in the world. You can pretty much just drill a hole somewhere, and there's going to be oil somewhere. So I don't think it would be that much of a crisis. So I don't think they're going to get involved. They have enough headaches as it is with the Americans over tariffs, which is what the Chinese care about, to antagonize the Americans over Iran. So I don't think they're going to provide any assistance. So I don't know whether there's a Zionist lobby there, but I just don't think that they're going to get involved. I mean, they're no particular friends of Israel either, which is a little different from Russia. There is a bond between Russia and Israel, but I don't think there's any particular bond between China and Israel. But I don't think China is going to get involved in this. Now, the question of what you asked here is that are there forces that want to keep this war going, just as there are forces that want to keep the Ukraine war going? I have my doubts, for the reason that Israel is limited in its ability to sustain a war for any length of time. Ukraine also had limited, but Ukraine was getting deliveries from NATO, from the United States. Ukraine is also a bigger country than Israel. But Israel's already fighting a war on another front. I mean, it still hasn't finished off Hamas. And still has problems with Hezbollah, still has problems with the Houthis. So a lengthy war with Iran would be problematic for Israel. So my view is that they want the United States to come in and to deliver a knockout blow to Iran, and then let chaos reign. Basically Iran. The Iranian government collapses, the civil war, and the ultimate agenda is, of course, the partition of Iran. So you kind of create a Kurdish state, create a Baluchi state, a kind of a Persian state, an Azeri state. I mean, that would be the agenda. So I don't think they want to keep the war going. I think the goal is to inflict a devastating defeat on Iran and then to break Iran up. I think that's going to be a tall order. I don't think the government will collapse just because of a bombing campaign by the United States. I think it would collapse if it signed the humiliating agreement with the United States, basically just giving up on enrichment. That might really, people will see, hey, this Ayatollah regime is very weak, and this is our moment to strike. When the government seems weak. So that would be the moment of greatest peril for the clerics. But otherwise, I think it will survive. So I don't quite see it I mean, the Ukraine is a different case, because the what the plan was there was no way that you could inflict a severe, an immediate, devastating defeat on Russia. I think that was always unlikely. So the plan, the US NATO plan, was to have a slow moving war that would slowly, gradually whittle away Russia's power, Russian financial, economic strength, and then, of course, Russia's population. And so it was a long-term war that would gradually weaken Russia. I think that was the plan. I mean, and I think in this case they're looking for a quick knockout blow, and then see enjoy the chaos in Iran. So I think it's a slightly different project. Anyway, so Vic then goes on. I'm conspiratorial, I guess, but every day it gets harder and harder not to be. I agree with that. Absolutely agree there. And then Stone River, thank you very much, Stone River, says, apparently MAGA will support Trump because he's Trump, not because he is America first. Yes, that's the that seems to be the line coming from these MAGA influencers like Steve Bannon and Charlie Kirk, who having said, well, we can't go in, we can't go to war against Iran. This is, no more stupid wars in the Middle East, no more foreign interventions. But that goes with the caveat is that, well, if Trump decides to do it, then all of us MAGA influencers have to salute the flag, click our heels, and support the president because we support Trump. We trust Trump's judgment. I'm not quite sure how you trust somebody's judgment when, by your own definition, his judgment is terribly awry. And that includes the judgment that he displayed during his first term, when he did all sorts of idiotic things, such as assassinating Soleimani, or selling lethal weapons to Ukraine, or bombing Syria twice. So to say, oh, we trust Trump's judgment, but you one event after another, when clearly you admit that his judgment is seriously wrong. But that's the message from Bannon and from Charlie Kirk. Hey, we have to continue, once he's made the final decision, then we have to support our troops, support our bombers. Well, that was the same argument that was made at the time of the Iraq invasion, which was, well, now that George W. Bush has sent in the American forces, we patriotic Americans, however much we don't think highly of this decision, we have to support the troops. Got to support the troops. And that seems to be the line coming out from Bannon and the rest. And then you think, well, what is there? Where's America first in all of this? This is Trump first. You say it's all about Trump, not about America first, and that's what Trump himself says. No, it's about me. It's not about America first. It's about me. It's about supporting me and supporting my supposed infallibility. Apparently he's a sort of like papal infallibility. His rulings are not to be questioned. We can. Before he's made this decision, we can question him and pressure him. But once he's made a ruling, then his judgment is infallible. It really does seem like a cult rather than any serious policy argument. Anyway, thank you very much, Stone River. Appreciate your generosity. And then Richard Phillips says, "Hi. What devastated me is the way that slime bucket Cruz admitted that he basically sabotaged Germany's gas supply and that Russia has no right to sell gas at all. This effectively means Europe is totally captured by American Beak Energy and their expensive liquefied natural gas. Yes, he did talk about that. It was a very peculiar ramble in which he seemed to think that Biden caused the war in Ukraine over this liquefied natural gas. Now, because well, not over liquefied, but over the Nord Stream pipelines, somehow. Oh well, he signed off on the Nord Stream pipelines, and that was a shot in the arm for Putin, and that guaranteed war, which makes no sense at all, because why would he go to war if it's providing gas to Germany? I mean, it just doesn't really make much sense. But Cruz's argument was bizarre because it was the Nord Stream pipeline was never really Russia's idea to begin with. It was the Germans who came to the Russians and asked them to build this pipeline, because what had happened is that the gas pipelines were going across Ukraine, and Ukraine was siphoning off the gas, or Ukraine wasn't paying Russia its transit fees, and so Russia was cutting back on its gas deliveries to Ukraine. So the Germans came to the Russians and said, "Well, why don't we bypass Ukraine, build the pipelines underwater, and then so we can have our cheap, reliable energy without going through these constant headaches with by transiting the gas across Ukraine." So so he got that wrong, as if this is a Russian project. It was never a Russian project. It was a German project. But also, it wasn't really about anything. I mean, he avoids, of course, the main events that led up to the war, which was the coup in Maidan, and then, of course, Biden's commitment throughout 2021 to induct Ukraine into NATO. The whole issue of the Nord Stream 1 and 2, I mean, when Russia began its sort of, I mean, even before the start of the so-called SMO, Germany under Olaf Scholz, Sergeant Scholz, had said we're not going to get any gas on the Nord Stream. And that was already a likely event to take place, because it was always likely that if Russia goes into Ukraine, then Germany, and in fact all of the European powers, will impose sanctions on Russia, and the sanctions would include no gas flows from Russia. So his whole logic never really made any sense, because of course once the SMO started, there was no gas whatever coming from Russia into Europe. So his whole thing, oh well, that I sanctioned the natural gas, and that prevented Putin from invading Ukraine, just made, but Biden somehow lifted it. It just made no sense, because the first thing, even before the start of the SMO, was essentially Europe said, we don't want your natural gas. And it was obvious that would be part of the sanctions. So Cruz's logic never made any sense at all. But you're right. His idea is, yes, Germany has no right to buy gas wherever it wants. It should get its gas where we tell it to get its gas, which namely from the United States. But the amazing thing is that the Germans kind of signed off on it and said, okay, well, that's fine. We'll get our gas from the United States. That was a peculiarity, and I think it was strange because he was kind of filibustering as he was explaining the strange, convoluted logic over the gas pipelines, and Tucker was increasingly baffled what he was trying to explain. It just didn't make any sense. Anyway, Robert says, in the 1980s, wary of Iran's attempts to stir Islamic unrest in the Muslim republics, the USSR viewed revolutionary Tehran as a threat. Yep, that's right. Yevgeny Primakov allegedly looked at his watch and said, in a few hours, there will be no Iran. The Soviets hoped the regime would collapse under war pressure, but it didn't. My question is, when and why did Iran start to shift and reform its foreign policy towards the USSR? That's a very, very good question. The Khomeini was very hostile to the USSR, and the USSR was very hostile to Iran. And even there was a moment in the 1980s when the Soviet Union invoked a treaty that the Bolshevik regime had signed with Reza Pahlavi, according to which the Soviet Union had a right to intervene in Iran if its security was threatened. And so the Soviets started talking about this, that if our security is threatened, we have this treaty that we signed with Reza Pahlavi, according to which we can intervene. This was signed in the early 1920s. We can intervene in Iran. And the Soviet Union did intervene in Iran after 1945. They created these two people's republics, a kind of Kurdish people's republic and an Azeri people's republic. So, and the Soviet Union in the 1980s was providing arms to Saddam Hussein during the Iran-Iraq war, as were the Western powers. So everyone was supporting Saddam Hussein against Iran. So the Iranian regime began changing its approach toward Russia after the death of Khomeini. That was in 1989, and this has been a gradual process of normalizing relations with Russia, and indeed adopting a kind of friendly relations with Russia. I don't think Iran trusts Russia very much, but it clearly decided some time ago that it never wanted to get itself into the situation it was in during the 1980s, when not only was it isolated diplomatically, had no allies at all, was in danger of armed attack. The Saddam Hussein invasion was sponsored by the United States and Saudi Arabia, and as I said, supported by the USSR and France and the British. So the Iranian leaders, I think, after the death of Khomeini, decided we don't really want this to happen again, and so they've now have good relations with other powers. So Israel and the United States, that's still a problem, but they're not isolated. Having said that, there's also really a limited amount that either Russia or China will do for them. Russia's completely preoccupied with this war in Ukraine. I mean, it just doesn't have anything to spare. China is not going to want to get involved. It doesn't want another source of friction with the United States. But Iran does have some resources, and we talked earlier about it has missiles. It can inflict damage on Israel. So we'll have to see what military capability it has. But yeah, I mean, there's no question. Iran Iran made a very sensible decision to move away from the diplomatic isolation of the 1980s. Um, anyway, thank you, Robert. And Richard Phillips says it's fairly obvious bait by Israel, but the problem is they couldn't have dumped the bait unless they got agreement from the USA because it would have been too risky. That's a very good question. I think we still don't have an answer to that question, and most of the accounts that we've been reading is one in which Israelis went ahead figuring that the United States would follow. As Max Blumenthal said, something like, the Israelis have, or particularly Netanyahu, have been looking for a dumb goyim in the White House, somebody who will carry out Israel's orders, fight Israel's wars for it. And Netanyahu figures that he found the dumb goyim in Trump. So that's why, it's like this was the Israel plan, but it's like you go in and then you figure that Trump will come in after you. Hey, once they realize that Israel's position is perilous, that the Americans will come in and fight this war. So far, up until today, it seemed to be working. It seemed like Trump had taken the bait, and Trump was going in to support Israel. Now it seems Trump is getting cold feet, and so we'll see. But I haven't, other than the claims of the Israelis that that Trump and Bibi were working on it together. This a really clever, cunning enterprise. Then we haven't had any confirmation of this. I still don't think it would have made any sense for Trump to do this, to essentially to lie and deceive the Iranians during these negotiations. In other words, what the negotiations were taking place in Oman, and in the meantime, Trump and Netanyahu were planning an unprovoked act of aggression against Iran. Because if that were the case, if it were shown that that's what happened, then Trump will essentially no longer be able to negotiate with anyone. Who's going to trust Trump? You're obviously just lying. You're lying to, and you can't do that in diplomacy. Diplomacy is based on some level of trust. Otherwise, why would anyone sign any agreement with you if you're going to just walk away from anything? And of course, Israel, nobody signs agreements with Israel unless the United States underwrites the agreement, which is why Hamas signed the deal at the beginning of the year, because the United States underwrote it. But if it's just Israel and without backing from the United States, well, nobody's going to sign a deal with Israel, because Israel, of course, lies and cheats and deceives and will kill you the moment you walk out of the door. But the United States isn't quite like that. So if Trump really was in on it, and then that this was a cunning plan cooked up by the Israelis and the Americans, then I think Trump will pay the price, in that he won't be able to negotiate anything with anyone, because nobody's going to sit down at the table with him. Anyways, thank you, Richard. Marty, thank you, Marty, for your generosity. And Marty says, blessing Israel in the situation. Happy Thursday, George and Gagglers. Happy Thursday to you, Marty. Thank you. Really appreciate it. So here's a picture, very gruesome picture of the members of the U.S. administration sitting there. Let's see, is this which is meeting? Was this the meeting with? Yeah, they're all looking sullen, but Hexeth is looking particularly sullen. Yeah, thank you so much, Marty, for that picture. Neocon Theater, and then Richard says it's extremely weak misdirection. Refuse to admit involvement, but then pretend Israel cannot be controlled and support Israel because they're being being attacked. No, I mean that's absolutely right, because of course if it's that line which is coming from the New York Times that we can't control Israel, then of course the logic would dictate, well, okay, if we can't control Israel, then you say, hey, you're on your own. We're not providing you with any help. We're not going to provide you with any intelligence. We're not going to provide you with any money. We're not going to provide you with any arms. We're not even going to provide you with any diplomatic support. I mean, the idea that we can't control Israel is ridiculous. So Vic Shakapopoulos says, I'm not sure you're right about your belief that most of Mossad's successes are in fact thanks to the US intelligence. Well, I don't know. I mean, here's the point: is that this is the this is the we have Mossad successes, and then we have one failure after another, and then we try to extrapolate. We don't know what goes on in the murky world of intelligence. But given Israel's spectacular failures, I mean, they are truly spectacular. I mean, killing the wrong people, hijacking the wrong plane, getting the Yom Kippur War wrong, getting October the 7th wrong. The story that the Mossad is 10 feet tall just makes no sense. So we have these stories of these fantastic successes, and then we have these spectacular failures. And we saw what happened as in Munich. I mean, that whole thing when they went after the Munich Olympics terrorists, they didn't kill anyone who had anything to do with the 1972 attack. They just killed completely innocent people. So that's why I said that it's quite possible that when Mossad has these successes, then it's thanks to British and U.S. intelligence. But I don't know for certain. So anyway, I think that their ability to infiltrate groups and institutions is huge. The Israelis can make use of the rather unique phenomenon of dual loyalty that millions of Jews around the world have. Also, remember what Nixon said about Jews being born spies. I didn't know Nixon said that, but okay. Well, I think that's what you're saying is true, but they managed to infiltrate Iran, whether that's due to the Israelis or whether it's to the Americans. The Americans may well have been able to infiltrate Iran. I mean, Israel does have difficulties infiltrating very much in the Arab world, because you can't really travel around in the Arab world if you have anything to do with Israel. Now, of course, you can create fake passports and so on, and I'm sure that they do that. I just have my doubts that, given all the spectacular failures, that they have this amazing power. Remember, this is Peter was saying this the other day. It has been a part of popular culture folklore that Mossad is so incredibly all-seeing and powerful. I mean, it's part of the popular culture. The moment you see someone from Mossad, wow, he's not someone you mess with. They're so good at what they do. But then you're always asking the question, well, how did they miss something like October the 7th? Now, if you're going to make the argument, oh, they didn't really miss it, they wanted this to happen. Okay, I haven't seen any evidence of that. I haven't seen the proof that Netanyahu wanted this to happen. Maybe proof of that will emerge, but at this stage, I don't see evidence that this is something that they wanted. Or again, the Yom Kippur attacks and so on. So, all I'm saying is that I'm skeptical before I embrace the theory that Mossad, so the all-seeing, never has there been such an intelligence agency as Mossad. Then I look around and say, well, they seem to be quite successful in cases when they're working with the British and the Americans. And the British and the Americans are pretty good, especially the British. The British are very good at spying. They have a long record of intelligence operations, as has the CIA, a long record of intelligence operations. So when they're working together, then Mossad has successes. When they're not working together, then Mossad doesn't. So we'll have to see. I mean, I think I wrote that in response to, I think, the wild claim that somehow Mossad pulled off this assassination of JFK, for which, again, no evidence has ever been presented, any link at all between Oswald and Mossad. So that's why I wrote that. But the world of intelligence is indeed very murky. We can't give any definitive answers to it. But it's interesting, that one great success of Mossad was their abduction of Vanunu. If you remember, Vanunu was that whistleblower from Israel, from Dimona, who came to the Sunday Times with blueprints of Israel's nuclear weapons program, and then he was, the Israelis apparently played the honeypot thing, and he flew to Rome with this American woman who turned out to be working for Mossad. And when he was in Rome, he was, of course, drugged and abducted and taken to Israel. But the thing about that story, again, Mossad, brilliance, they seized Vanunu and took him to Rome and then to Israel. Fantastic operation. It's obvious from that whole story that this was the British and the Americans did this. They provided all the key information to Mossad about Vanunu, where he was staying and everything. It was idiot British journalists who didn't protect their source, and they set this up. Asked Mossad, hey, can you make sure that you don't actually abduct him from London? Can you make sure that you do it in Italy? And we don't care about Italy. In those days, nobody took Italy seriously. So, but it'd be too embarrassing if you kidnap Vanunu here in London. Could you please take him to Italy and then kidnap him there? Okay, fine. So that operation really was, obviously, it was a British-American operation, and Mossad took the credit. But hey, in the world of espionage, you don't want to be taking any credit. You're supposed to keep what you do secret. Anyway, thank you, Vic. And then Richard Phillips says, well, not everyone considered it fiction, so that's a bit of a debatable remark, especially since he's pandering to a Christian audience. Well, the only what I said is a fiction is that ultimately there's no historical record for certainly most of the Old Testament. I mean, I think it's safe to say very little of it. There's very little evidence. I mean, archaeological evidence. I mean, that's all. I mean, leave aside documentary evidence, but there's very little even archaeological evidence for many of those great stories that are in the Old Testament. But as I said, I mean, it's a holy text, and that doesn't matter whether there's actually a documentary record or whatever, but it is a holy text, and thus inappropriate to cite for on reasons of state. I mean, it's like, well, I support Israel because of something that's in the Bible, because the moment you say it's in the Bible, then you say, well, what part of the Bible has in any way been corroborated by any modern forensic evidence? Or just anything at all, any archaeological evidence at all? None. There's none whatsoever. I mean, it might emerge at some point, but so far there's been no archaeological evidence to support almost everything that's in the Old Testament. But I don't care about that. I mean, it's a different kind of a work. Now the New Testament is a little different because there is some evidence there about Jesus. Not very much, but at least there is some evidence of the historical existence of Jesus. Tacitus wrote about him. But this, if you're starting about Genesis, that's dubious. Anyway, Richard goes on about Ted Cruz. However, the stronger failure was his inability to actually quote the Bible correctly, even though he's using it as a reason to justify his actions. No, I think that's right. I think Tucker pressed him on it. He's saying, "Hey, I'm a Christian. I'd love to know what it is that you're citing. Where does where does it say that?" And so, well, I can find it, but you're right. I mean, if you are going to quote the Bible, then you want to have chapter and verse to hand. Anyway, and then Richard goes on. So he doesn't know precise details about Iran, and he doesn't even know the precise details about the Bible, beginning to look like he's kind of full of this whatever. Yeah, I agree. He enjoys this reputation of being Alan Dershowitz's most brilliant student. Apparently, Dershowitz always says, "Well, Ted Cruz, he was my most brilliant student at Harvard." And you can see, well, why, given how fervently pro-Israel the two are, you're left to question whether Dershowitz really thought that Ted Cruz was that brilliant, or whether he liked Ted Cruz's Israel stance. Certainly, he didn't come across as a brilliant legal mind there. And then Richard goes on. Personally, I think the Christian thing is a bit of a fraud. I mean, if they are Christian, why are they so happy to bomb the hell out of everyone? Yeah, that's true. They even vaguely distrust. Okay. And then, well, if Germany was the one to initiate the project, then that makes American treachery just even worse. No, that's right. I mean, there's no question. I mean, they destroyed a pipeline, the Nord Stream pipeline, that was built by the Germans. It was the Germans who wanted it. So it wasn't in any way, I mean, the idea that when you were hitting Russia, you were hitting Germany. It was the Germans who wanted this. But Cruz seems to think that, well, America just has the right to decide what kind of energy supplies Germany is entitled to. Anyway, and then Richard says, something for the dogs. Well, the dogs will appreciate. They're sleeping now, but they'll, when they wake, they'll let their feelings known. So thank you so much, Richard. And then Robert says, is it likely that Robert Maxwell is the one who betrayed Vanunu to Mossad? Well, that's been the speculation that it was Maxwell, but I would think that there'd be plenty of people who would have been aware of that about Vanunu was in contact with the journalists from the Times. Now, Rupert Murdoch himself could well have tipped off Mossad, or more likely, he tipped off MI6. Or tipped off the CIA. Either way, the CIA and MI6 would have been very well aware of Vanunu's contacts with the Times, the Times journalists did nothing whatever to protect their source, which itself is kind of instructive. Knowing the peril that he was in, it was kind of instructing that they did really nothing to protect him. I mean, he was just allowed to leave the country and go to Italy because he'd met a girl. It's like, you've never heard of honey traps? But the fact that the Mossad made sure not to kidnap him in London, but to do it in Rome, would indicate that there was clearly collusion in place between Mossad and MI6. MI6 clearly made their feelings known that this would be too embarrassing for the British government if the kidnapping took place in the streets of London. We can't really have people kidnapped, so that's why they signed off on this. Signed off on his leaving the country to go to Rome. So now Maxwell, the story about Maxwell, and it could well be, but I don't exactly see where Maxwell came into this story, because Maxwell was at the Mirror. Now, I'm sure Maxwell heard about this, but Rupert Murdoch knew about this, right? MI6 knew about this. Everybody knew about this. So it wasn't that difficult, really, just to tip off Mossad and then tell them that, yeah, you can take him, but just make sure you don't do it in London, because that would be just too embarrassing for the British government. Anyway, my time is up. Thank you, as always, to everyone who joined me. Thank you for all of... refresh this page. Let me refresh this page. Anyway, I've refreshed the page, but anyway, my time is up, and I appreciate all of your questions, comments. Above all, I appreciate those who contributed to the tip jar. We'll have to see what the dogs feel. I'm not. The dogs are not happy, but that's the way of the world. We have some special guests coming in the next day or so on the Gaggle. I think you'll be very happy with the guests. And then we'll be back on Monday on a live stream jointly with Peter, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And then Tuesday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, will be time for my solo. So until then, thank you very much. Good night. See you very soon. All the best. Bye-bye.